Welcome to the World Football Summit podcast, the show for football industry leaders who want to stay ahead of the game. We bring you the latest insights, trends, and stories from the experts driving innovation and progress in sports business worldwide. Join us as we dive deep into the ideas and initiatives transforming the world of football. From sustainability and innovation to player development, fan engagement, and everything in between. Our goal is to unite the global football industry and drive positive change and progress. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the World Football Summit podcast. I'm your host, Jaime, CMO at World Football Summit. This week, we welcome Unmish Parthasarathi to the show. Unmish is founder of Pictureboard Partners, which he founded after a brilliant career at brands like IMG, ESPN, Fox, or the International Cricket Council. I met Unmish because he's also a speaker at World Football Summit Asia, and I realized he could be someone who brought a lot of value to you guys. During the conversation, we discuss how content and technology combine to match what the different sports industry stakeholders look for, the current trends in the industry around sports content, and how to engage fans that is less intense and more fragmented. Lessons he has learned from working with and at some amazing brands. And of course, leadership and career advice based on his experience so far. I think this conversation is going to surprise you, so I suggest you stick around. And you know it, Juan Valdez, which is 100% premium Colombian coffee, didn't miss this one. Again, I'm very picky when it comes to coffee, and I must say, Juan Valdez definitely hits the bar. But this cup of coffee is much more than that. It is a premium blend developed by female coffee makers, and Juan Valdez has this program in which they look to empower these women both economically and socially. This resonates very much with the Female Leadership in Football initiative we launched at World Football Summit a few months back. So I'm very excited to partner with them to offer this premium blend to you. You can order it online at es.juanvaldez.com. Again, that's es.juanvaldez.com. And they actually have a special discount for the World Football Summit podcast listeners. All you need to do is enter the code WFS Podcast at checkout. Again, that's WFS in capital letters podcast at checkout. And they deliver to all markets in Europe. So give it a try and let me know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the podcast on your platform of choice and share it with your industry colleagues. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter where every week we send updates, trends, and everything that goes on at our events. You can find the link in the show notes. Nothing else from my side. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Unmish Parthasarathi. Well, Unmish, thank you for joining us on the World Football Summit podcast. It's great to have you. Ever since I saw you were going to join us for World Football Summit Asia, I just said I have to speak to him on the podcast because I think there's a lot of things you're going to help the audience learn and understand. So yes, welcome.
Abby, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I have had a relationship with World Football Summit for quite a while, from before the pandemic, when Jan Lissi was looking to do something in the region. So I'm really excited about coming to Jeddah and being on stage and working with you and Kabir to make the event a success. But thanks for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. This podcast and WFS Asia, I'm sure. Anyway, Miss, before we go into all the different topics I want to discuss with you today, is I was wondering if you could briefly introduce yourself. And I always like to ask my guests, why is it that you do what you do?
Let me introduce myself. I'm an Indian by birth, British by citizenship, and a long-term resident of Singapore. I moved from London to Singapore in 2008 on a 3-year contract, and 15 years since, I have now worked for myself longer than I have worked for anybody else, which probably says more about me than about the industry, I guess. The other way I often describe myself is as somebody who's worked across content and code, which is short for technology, and capital, which is about how we make money. So content, code, and capital is often the Venn diagram that I sort of use to describe my corporate career and also my individual practice. And then last but not least, I wear different hats. I work very closely with the C-suite and boards of organizations as a strategic advisor. I work with industry publications and industry events across sport, media, and gaming, both in Asia and Europe. Curating programs, hosting panels, and occasionally, if they're really, really desperate, emceeing the events for them. So it's a portfolio career that I do at the moment. But fundamentally, what I'm driven by is two things. A, serving the fan, and serving the fan in a profitable manner. Because doing something is fine in and of itself. Doing something without making a profit is not sustainable. So, serving the fan and serving the fan profitably is what I seek to achieve. And I don't do it by myself. We very much have an engagement model. I work with a bunch of different subject matter experts. And when I work with clients, often not only the client sponsor, but also client side staff become part of the team. So that's a bit about me.
Nice. I like that. Serving the fan profitably. I mean, if you would sum up the objectives of any sports industry property, that should be it. Other words are if it is or not, right? So anyway, and I was wondering, I mean, before you decided to launch Picture Board Partners, you had a brilliant career, and your resume speaks for itself with brands like IMG, ESPN, Fox, News Corp, the International Cricket Council. I mean, all over the place, right? So I was wondering, what pushed you to become an entrepreneur, and why Picture Board Partners?
I mean, there were three reasons. One, if you notice, all these brands are analog brands, and we were very clearly in the digital age. And when I had the opportunity or the offers or the requests to go and join another pay television business, but I was quite clear that I wanted to work in very, very digitally native, digitally defined situations, solutions, and scenarios. That was my primary motivation, and I was not finding that in the organizations that I was working with. And those who I interviewed with, and you can guess who the suspects were. They would get in touch, put me through 5 to 7 interviews, and then say, "You are lovely, but you are the bridesmaid, not the bride." So there was then, so it's the old thing about if you can't solve the problem through other people's means, you try and solve it by your own. So that was the motivation, very much to sort of work in digitally native, digitally defined areas. That was one. The second motivation was I had for a long time had this thesis that, this was 2000, this was the back half of the last decade. I'd had this thesis which has come to pass that, in this decade of 2021 or 2030, there are going to be about 1 billion fans who are going to come online. And a majority of them are going to be within a 5-hour flying radius of Singapore. And majority of them would come and would stay using models, frameworks, and solutions which were not necessarily what has worked in the West. So on the one hand, I was being professionally restless and wanted to work in areas which were more digital and forward-looking. On the other hand, I was intellectually curious to sort of say, if this be the larger ecosystem problem opportunity, two sides of the same coin that we are looking to solve, what would that look like? And then that took me to the third point about, when I started, today what I do is quite different in terms of its economic model than what I was doing earlier. When I started, I still remember whether it was being the global head of digital sales at the ICC or senior vice president at News Corp or regional head of strategy. In C-suite role, you need 2 or 3 different types of external resources. Was my sense. And I'm convinced about that today. One, I think, is you need an executive coach. 2, I think you need a very good source of market intelligence. And 3, you need a strategist. And I felt that need for when I was, in those leadership roles. So the idea really from an industry perspective is to try and merge those exec coaching, market intelligence, and strategist role, where you are enabling the leader to be the best version of himself or herself as per the institution's requirements. So A, very much looking at the digital aspect, B, being very Asia-centric and Singapore-centric, Asia-focused and Singapore-centric, and C, having a very different kind of a resourcing model in terms of, exec coaching, being a strategist and being a market intelligence source. And a lot of that came down to understand the industry and having a reputation and also having trust with your clients that you would be watching their back much more than they think you would. So that really is the role.
Yeah, that's nice. And that concept of digital natives and analogs is something that I first heard from Christopher Lockhead, Category Pirates. And it resonated with me since the very beginning. And you can see that the companies that are winning today, and they're probably going to win the future, understand that we're in a digital native world. We're probably seeing more people now that are digital natives than digital analog. The problem is that decisions are being taken by the digital analogs, right? So at the end of the day, those who win are the ones that are able to understand that shift in just the type of person, really, not just type of consumer or fan. It's a type of person, So that's interesting.
And if I may, Jaime, I think I said that the analog employers were not, I probably outlived my utility there, and the digital employers or would-be employers would get in touch and go through the interviews and I wouldn't come out. But if you look back now, there was a reason for that. They were right in their decision because none of the FANGs have made a big contribution to sport.
Yeah.
All the applications of sport using technology and finance, which is fundamentally the area I work in, have been independent of the FANG, especially outside the US. Yes, you could argue, Drive to Survive and Netflix and Sunday Night Football, or Thursday Night Football, and the NFL and Amazon Prime Video and Meta. We work very closely with Meta at the ICC. Yes, they have looked at certain areas of the industry which align with their objectives, as opposed to solving for the sports industry. So I don't blame them for it, but I totally understand why they got in touch. Why are the 5 interviews? And then they'll kind of say, you're too much of a sports guy.
Yeah.
So therefore, one's begun to actually now work a lot more with founders and strategics, so founders of startups and leaders of strategic businesses who are creating and curating solutions for the sports industry itself. So a lot of the recent work post-pandemic has been either buy side for investors or sell side for the founders of people who are creating solutions specifically for the industry, which I found very satisfying. Occasionally frustrating, but mostly satisfying.
Interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, your slogan is shaping future content, right? What's that about? I mean, future contents.
No, sure. Yeah, look, I think that there are 3 things that are very important in what I do. When I'm working with a business, right? Say I'm working with you and Jan Alisi, for example, on World Football Summit at WFS 2.0. Say that's the project. I'm not authoring it. I'm not authoring the vision. I'm editing it. I'm shaping it. It's your vision. I'm not the author.
Okay.
I'm the editor of a book. You have a manuscript. My job is to turn it into a bestseller.
I get it.
When you see it on the bookshelf, it'll have your name and hopefully the publisher's name. It won't have my name on it. The editor of a book is never named by the author or the publisher.
Okay.
So it's very much shaping. Secondly, it's very much future. I think it's very important to have, for future generations, using future technologies, and for future longevity. Everything from classical antiquity to religious treatises, scientific work. They have stood the test of time because they have been future relevant.
Okay. Yeah.
So if I shape content, which is not authored but shaped by me, which is future and content is all I know. I can't write code, but I can talk about technology and find business cases for it. I'm not a banker, but I understand finance and commerce. But content is fundamentally the currency that I'm dealing with. So unfortunately, that last word was very limited. So I stuck within those limitations.
No, but it's good because at the end of the day, if you ask me, content is kind of like it's key because it's what you put out to share your story. So any in this case, any sports organization at the end of the day has to be able to tell the story to engage not only the local fans but the fans internationally, which is kind of like the next. It's kind of like the holy grail, that everybody uses it. And in that sense, I guess technology is key, right? So being able to understand not only technology, but also one of the problems that I see in the industry is that to be able to talk to a sports property about technology in a way they understand. So simplify it in a way. So that's I guess, one of the main problems that I see. Now, you've worked with...
May I sorry to interrupt you. I think you make some very good points. I think people often lose fact about, the whole strapline around shaping future content is looking to address the fact that when we speak, we more often than not say what we want to say or what we believe is relevant.
Yes.
And it's a very human emotion. It's very rare to keep in mind that what is my audience? Why is that audience engaging with me? Not what is my aim from that audience. Why is that audience engaging with me? And what should I do to continue for them to engage with me? It's very much an outside-in view of the customer. Historically, I don't think we've had to grapple with that challenge because we have never had a very segmented audience to deal with. Television, newspapers were very singular audiences. It was broadcasting. It was not narrow casting. It was broadcasting. Today, in a digital world with an omni-channel network, you need to be able to identify and speak to different segments. And it's not limited only to consumer audiences. Even
Yeah.
trade audiences, the way you would talk to a title sponsor prospect is very different to a official partner prospect if selling sponsorships.
Mhm.
The way you talk to a cloud-based provider for a sponsorship is very different from a blockchain or a DAO-based, DeFi brand, because there are different
Mhm.
levels of nuance. So I think just understanding which audience you're speaking to, why are they listening to you? Why should they listen to you?
Yes.
They have options. So that's an important piece.
But you made a good point there, which is how do you maintain that attention? Because you can grab them once, but the goal here is to maintain it, right? And to your point, the industry, I guess it happens in all industries, but the sports industry in general has very clear or a very different set of stakeholders, of segments, right? So you have your fans, you have your sponsors, you have the institutions. There's so many things, right? So the problem there is they measure success very differently. So how can you bring the ecosystem together to kind of like drive growth of the industry in general? Because sometimes those interests are kind of opposite to each other.
Yeah, look, I think it's very simple. It's very simple. Yeah. Sport is a business at the end of the day, right? Anybody who wants to be paid larger amounts of money over a longer period of time has to approach that particular area as a business, right? Let's just start there. And a business is very simple. A business is basically a business happens when you create value and you capture value.
Yes.
If you only create value, you're an academic.
Mm-hmm.
If you only capture value but don't create it, you're a pirate.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be both, right? So, sport is a business. A business is built by creating and capturing value. And thirdly, a business maintains itself. You spoke about how engagement has to be retained by having a customer focus and fulfilling the need to build trust. Now, if that be your thesis, um, being customer centric is important. Having a sense of how you're going to turn a profit is important.
Mm-hmm.
And something that sport has acquired post the pandemic, which is it has never had in the 30 years I have worked in, is a degree of humility.
Mm. Good one.
That sport today realizes that without first party data, it's hard to engage segment audiences and engage them.
Mm-hmm.
Sport today realizes that consumers are no longer given customers. They're consumers, but they're not customers for life. They have options.
Mm-hmm.
Sport today realizes that having a return on equity is very important. It can be financial equity, it can be brand equity, it can be social equity.
Mm-hmm.
But delivering a return consistently on all those three equities is very, very important. I think if we have that worldview, customer centricity, continued profitability, and a degree of relevance in their lives, I think those are three areas or vectors or variables or qualifiers or success factors which can unite all stakeholders, federations, leagues, clubs, broadcasters, brands, governments, venues, stadiums, technology companies, finances, whatever the case might be. Customer
Mm-hmm.
focus, profitability, and continued future relevance. Because that wasn't the case before the pandemic because there was a degree of hubris in sport. Today,
Mm-hmm.
sport has gone from hubris to humility,
Yeah,
which always is good.
it is. And that's a good one, actually. It's something that we've discussed a lot here at World Football Summit and on the show, no? And that lack of focus on profitability. And you said it at the very beginning, right? So serving the fan profitably. Um, and I guess to your point about ROI and humility, I think you also see it when they, and when I mean they, it's the sport properties, when they look to implement new technological solutions, right? At the end of the day, they are not really either betting on it or just really taking the steps they need to take to actually embrace it and bring the family along, right? So I was wondering, given your work, I think technology is going to be a key factor for any sports industry in the future. But what are some misconceptions that you find among sports properties that are looking to implement technology now? I guess in this case it would be more content focused technology, but any in general. Are there any that stand out to you?
I think there are three, and it's very common. Um, One, that technology is a silver bullet.
Mm-hmm.
Buy a data lake and we'll be done. Buy a cloud-based asset management system and our archive is protected. Or, have a social media account and you have engagement. So it's seen as a silver bullet as opposed to part of a larger portfolio. That's fun.
Yeah.
That's first. Second, more often than not, the decision of technology or the definition of the problem statement or the running of the tender to find a technology solution to solve a particular problem statement is the primary KPI of the chief technology officer or the chief digital officer.
Mm-hmm.
No organization does that with their money.
Okay.
No organization does that with their real estate. So no organization does that with their human capital.
Mm-hmm.
CEOs are very removed from decision making on choice of technology.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that is a problem that the technology industry needs to solve, because it's not a problem limited to sport.
No, it's not at all. I don't know why it kind of like reminds me of a conversation, an interview I heard on Lenny Rachiski's podcast the other day with Brian Chesky, founder of Airbnb. And he was saying something like, he's the chief product officer. And he's the one that actually understands the product probably best in the company. And he's a CEO. And the problems that he sees is sometimes he sees kind of like, way up here and it's not, they're not in the details. And that's actually key to really understand how that technology is going to help the user, or in this case, the fan, right? So,
Look, it's a difficult one to square off. Bill Gates was the founder of Microsoft. Balmer was not, and that helped the business. Zuckerberg is the CEO of Meta, and they've done incredibly well. Yes, every company has challenges. Google had two co-founders, both of them Stanford Tech, Caltech boys.
yeah.
So there's something which says that. But then for every business, Gates had a Balmer.
Mm-hmm.
The Larry and Sergey had Eric Schmidt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and Zuckerberg surrounded himself with the right kind of people. So that's another way of looking at it. Saying, again, I think the tendency is always to look at things in a very singular way. So just as technology is seen as a silver bullet, you think of a CEO being as a magician.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not the case. But I think the beauty and the smartness of a CEO is to work out what they're strong at and what they're not strong at, and stick to what they know best, but surround themselves with people who are the blind spots. Now, it's easier said than done, but it's very important to keep that in mind. I think if you look at La Liga, if you look at what Senor Tomas has done over the last decade,
Mm-hmm.
there is no European league which has grown as much in the last decade, relative to the Premier League.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And right place, right time, got the clubs together, set up La Liga Tech. That's Nas Fortune, which is a huge compliment for La Liga Tech, because a large, NASDAQ listed company has said, we will partner with you and go forward. But, he didn't necessarily have only, he was a CEO, but he surrounded himself with the right kind of people to build to the blind spot. But he knew the strategic importance of that blind spot, and he knew what problem statements to give to them.
Right. But at the end of the day, I mean, the problem has to become before the technological application, right? Really understanding the problem was something I also discussed with Priti Shetty. She's a director at Brentford FC. And she was just talking about how the problem that Web3 had back in the day is that there was kind of like a need to implement a solution without really understanding what the fans' problem was. So that's why it failed. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I guess another thing to your point, which I totally agree, a strong team and really understanding where everything's going, is how do you identify those trends? And given your experience, I think you've been able to do that quite well, no? So how do you know, or what, I don't know if you can share some of your secrets to really understand the trends that, or any particular method or research that you follow to see, hey, this trend is coming, let's look into it, let's play around.
Look, he always make me sound like a star stock analyst who eventually, after a study, realized that his pickings were less than a monkey's. But I appreciate that. I think it comes back to this triangulation of content, code, and capital. Because I tend to not look at things only through, I don't have one big strength. As a professional, I haven't got one big strength. You can be a finance guy, you can be a tech person, you can be a content person. But if you sort of combine those three together and you're kind of above average in one and very good in the other and average in the third, you just start looking at things in a slightly different way. So that's the first point I would make. So I don't think it's unique to myself. It's just unique to the competencies, knowledge, and the views or worldview or perspectives that one brings to everyday life. Um, that's one. Two, I think it's not something which happened in the last 5 years or 8 years or ever since I've, sort of gone solo. But I felt reflect back on my career, even my formal career, I've always been in roles which did not exist in an organization.
Okay. Well,
5 out of my 8 roles did not exist in the organization when I joined it for over 20 years of corporate life.
wow.
And 3 out of those 5 roles disappeared when I moved out of that role.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I was global head of digital sales at the ICC for a 4-year period in an 8-year contract. And now the new contract, which starts 1st of Jan, digital video is rolled into it. The market is accepted, same tenders, off you go. Because at that time, they were looking at 2 different markets, digital and social and broadcast television.
Okay.
But that role no longer exists, but the need is being fulfilled.
Okay.
When I joined SNTV in 2000, early 2000, after and began became senior producer of digital, that business didn't do well, and it more often than not it doesn't. But it changed the course of the organization. 20 years later, what was a television news syndication business is still relevant. 50% of its business comes from digital, not television. Right? When I left ESPN Star and folks to join News Corp and launched Ball, it was a crazy 2 years. Eventually, the business had a crossroad to decide, do we build or do we buy? And eventually, it was a share equity swap into a company called Dugout, which then got sold into One Football.
Okay.
So you're part of a journey.
I remember that.
Which today, One Football is a proper digital football business. We were just 4 years, 5 years out of its time. So I think it's this content code capital perspectives, which probably makes fun join the dots and see things or guess what's coming around the corner. Equally, Harry, if there's something as straight and simple as daylight, I'll miss it.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the flip side, right? If you're not looking at it in a monochromatic manner, you will not see the detail and the obvious reality of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like being on the present, no?
Correct.
But to your point, I mean, that framework of content, code, and capital, this is just, I really like that framework. The first time I heard it, it was like, wow, that's good. Because it involves the 3 key aspects to consider for any future strategy, I would say. Once you have clear strategy and the problem you're trying to solve is, okay, what technology I'm going to use to solve this problem, how I'm going to generate content to tell my story about this problem, and then, but how I'm going to make it work from a profitability standpoint, right? Speaking about trends, I think this is a good segue into the next part of the conversation that I wanted to get your take on, which is kind of like analyze different trends that we see in the industry, especially related to our content. So let's just start off with a broad one, which is any particular trend or something related to fan engagement that you're looking out for, or that you need to, that you think any sports industry leader needs to understand?
I think we've got to start by, let's define content. Let's start by defining content. Content is about a story which breeds engagement, which breeds trust, which breeds loyalty. So you almost see that as a virtuous cycle, right? Content is a story, story is engagement, engagement is trust, trust is loyalty. So that should be your virtuous cycle. Anything which grows exponentially grows while you're sleeping. Anything which grows exponentially grows where the variable cost approaches zero for that growth. Right? So content equals story, story is engagement, engagement is trust, trust is loyalty, loyalty is repeat behavior. Let's define content as such. 1. 2, I don't think content creation today is linear as it used to be. I'm a producer, you're a consumer. I don't think it's linear. And also, I don't think content is finite. A 90-minute broadcast is finite. Half an hour pre-show is half an hour. 4 minutes, 2 minutes of airtime, 3 breaks, goodbye and good night. Today, when David Beckham posts about being at the World Cup semi-final in Bombay in support of UNICEF, and the Indian cricket legend Sachin Tendulkar talks about how he was part of a campaign for children to wash their hands before they ate, and how that brought down dysentery. That will live on.
It will. It's
as much as it's evergreen. As much, I'm sad to say, as India losing to Australia in final. But we won't talk about that.
But to your point, I see it on the podcast. And of course, I'm not going to compare myself to David Beckham whatsoever, right? But I see it that some episodes of the podcast just keep on accumulating, downloads, and even if it's been months since I published that, right? So you never know when someone's going to engage with your brand and then just start, just really interacting, right? And if I may, to your framework, which I really like about your definition of content, really is engagement at the end of the day, which is driving loyalty, driving trust, obviously. Ideally, that leads to revenue. Going back to serving that profitably, no?
You were talking about content code and capital and how it resonates. I do a lot of this, in the English language. There's a word called alliteration, which is basically a series of words all starting with the same letter. CCC, content code and capital. And I use that, and I combine that with design thinking principles when we do workshops for clients or when I'm trying to construct a framework of, and I use another one, which is called relevance, reach, and revenue.
Yes.
If it's relevant, you'll have reach. If you have reach, you will have revenue.
Yeah.
It'll come. It'll come even without you knowing it. It'll come even without your making a mess of it. If you make a mess of it, it will come in smaller amounts. If you're good about it, it'll come in large amounts. So it will come.
Yeah, it will. Now the
So
problem
relevance, reach, and revenue. Yeah.
I like that one too. And it's all tied together. But the problem that I see there is, yes, engagement is key. The problem with fans today, and I heard this definition, I really liked it. They're fragmented, and they pay less attention. So how do you work around that? Call it curve of attendance or attention, more than attention, and engagement. How do you solve?
So I have a contrarian view on that, which usually makes people sit up. And when federations or leagues or club chairmen or investors or brands talk to me and say, "Oh, audiences are fragmented and they have low attention spans," and I turn around and say, like all of you as organizations are fragmented. You're siloed.
Yeah.
And you have low attention spans when the data is in front of you. And you're paid for this. Right?
Yeah.
So, that's my sort of first point to make everyone sit up. The second point is, and my ex-boss, Peter Hunter, was going to be speaking at the summit as well. He was saying about how we should think about why content which is not short in its form has a low attention span. Because when I watch short form content, I never watch one video only in that session.
Yeah.
I'll end up watching at least 5, and that's 15 minutes. That's a half of a half-an-hour show. But the UX, UI, the content relevance, search and discovery, the quality of recommendation and the quality of the metadata is good.
Yeah.
So my session time is not that small. My classic time is small.
Yes.
And he fundamentally said, if you're not fitting your content to the expectation, device, time, money, situation of the individual, then why would you want to say that it's not a square peg in a round hole? I think that was a great example he gave.
Yeah. I mean, it seems obvious, but at the end of the day, content is meant to be consumed. So what that means is, you need to create something that is going to get the fan to consume it, not something that you want to tell them at the end of the day, right? So that's kind of...
I was once working with an editor. I still remember this was in London, TWI house. We were sitting downstairs in the edit suite, creating highlights. We were creating, highlights, something very basic, right? That's what you get to do as an assistant producer. And he said to me, "What is content?" I said, "Whatever." I mumbled something. He said, "Content is something which makes you feel content." Same, it's pronounced the same way, written the same way.
Yeah.
And he said, content is how you feel after you eat a meal. Content is how you feel after you have an ice cream. Now, if you think, just every time we think of content, think of how would the consumer feel when they have consumed the content. Will they feel content? Great line.
Yeah, it is.
1 o'clock, good night, everything highlights. I learned something.
It's a good one. It's a good one, actually. Yeah.
It's a very simple way of understanding what you're doing and why you want to do it.
Which is key. Again, it goes back to first principles at the end of the day, and you said it before, right? I mean, you said, who's your audience? Where are they engaging? And how are you going to maintain their attention, right?
Yeah.
But in that sense, Unmish, I'm wondering, because yes, everybody sees the role of content. Don't you think we've gotten to a point where there's almost too much content? Are we going to get to a point where there's like content saturation in sports or no?
My current thinking is no, pretty clearly, simply because the number of segments, it's mathematical, right? The number of segments we have to serve today
Mm-hmm.
are many, many, many more than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Sport has gone global. It's no longer a male audience. People are watching mainstream sports and niche sports. People are watching, neighborhood contests on a Saturday, and they're watching a Premier League football game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because technology enables you. So segments of consumption have gone up.
Yeah.
Point number one. Point number two, cost of production has gone down.
Yeah.
And expectation of finding the right content has gone up.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you see that, making people content with content,
Yeah.
to coin a phrase, is to fulfill them regularly. I think the
Yeah.
opportunities today for content to play a game or to make a difference is huge because production per hour per minute is cheaper than before.
Uh-huh.
And the number of segments that you have to engage in stable state is much higher.
Yeah.
So if you have a 2x2 matrix where you're saying number of segments high, low, and cost of production high, low, you fundamentally are on the top right because it makes economic sense and you have no choice.
Yeah.
Until you have no choice, this content factory will continue.
Yeah. And I think as long in the case of sports, right? I think we're in a period where everybody's saying, or not everybody, but there's people in the industry saying that the younger generations are not interested in sports, and I kind of disagree with that. I think they are. It's just what they may not be as interested in is in the live match for whatever reason, because it takes too long or whatever. But when you look at it, the amount of content that is being generated, call it video games, call it documentaries, highlights, whatever, that consumption is at an all-time high. That's something that actually La Liga shared. I think it was last year in a study they published, and I agree with that, right? So I don't think it's going to be saturation as long as the sport keeps driving interest, which it is driving interest. No,
I'll give you a story. When this is the Star Wars trilogy, I forget the exact details, and I'm not a Star Wars fan, so my apologies in advance for Star Wars fans who are offended.
mm-hmm.
The first movie came out in the late 70s, I think. It had about 80 cuts in the whole movie. 80 cuts, right?
Mm-hmm.
20 years later, there were 2,500 cuts.
Well,
the latest edition had 10,000 cuts. Now, that shows the degree of detail per second has gone up, even though the movie duration has broadly remained the same.
mm-hmm.
Right? Point number one. Point number two, the characters have not changed.
Mm-hmm.
Only the plot lines have. Number three, the primary place where you go and watch it has not changed. Primarily the cinema.
Mm-hmm.
How is that any different from a sports broadcast 20 years ago?
Yeah.
You primarily watch it in the bar or at home more often than not. You know the players, you don't know the plots. That's the beauty of Jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
But you are used to a certain degree of detail per second that you're not getting in a whole spot.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, if you look at just recently, the Cricket World Cup was going on, the ICC, and they've used, and we work with a couple of those companies, they had used augmented reality and first-person mixed reality vision, point of vision from the batsman, wearing the helmet, distance between two fielders, how far they are from each other and from the batsman, a real-time recreation using computer vision. It's no different from a computer game 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's in 1080p with, Dolby surround sound, if not Atmos.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you pack in more information, more detail per minute of broadcast is what keeps audiences, because they turn on. The one thing people forget is, the audiences drift away. They never question the fact that the audience turned up.
Yeah.
They turned up because of an expectation and loyalty and a hope. And then they went away because you didn't fulfill that. That's not the audience's fault.
Exactly. They showed up, right? And in that sense, Unmish, I'm wondering, do you have an example in mind of, or an organization in sports, doesn't have to be in football, but that's actually working well, or is an example to follow?
I have quite a few out there. I can only speak from personal experience. I think we work quite closely with a company called Quidditch Innovation Labs, which is a mixed reality, augmented reality business. Began as a drone business, and today there's computer vision around player tracking, and they've pioneered a lot of that work in cricket, and then they're from there moving into new areas. Have a look at them. Quidditch Innovation Labs. Quidditch is without the E. Two co-founders, Rahab and Gaurav, extremely bright. Definitely in the top 1% of the founders I've worked with in the last 10 years. And believe me, I've worked with thousands. So I think that's a very, very good business. And that's one extreme. That's the startup space, right?
Yeah.
I think the work that Dolby is doing in Atmos and vision and looking at, next generation audience spaces fascinates me.
Okay.
Full disclosure, former client, but what they have done with the Super Bowl, what they have done with FIFA, what they're doing with the Premier League, is one level. It's known Atmos, very immersive audio, vision, very clear pixels, all that kind of stuff. But they've started thinking, and it's public record information now. They've identified the automobile, the four-wheel car, as the next living space for entertainment.
Oh, wow.
After the living room. Because they worked out in Western society, the car is where all the action is.
Well, interesting.
So again, one is an established, listed, classic, media technology pioneer, where their name is the industry. It's like Colgate being called toothpaste, right? That's Dolby.
Yeah.
And then it was there around 30, 40 years. Small company, 2,500, 3,000 employees, but multi-billion-dollar revenue. One end, and the other end is Quidditch Innovation Labs, founded in 2000 and I think 15 or 16. Two co-founders who got to share a room during a fellowship program, and then went from drones to player tracking to redefining layers of a host broadcast and cricket. I think that those are the two ones which probably come to mind right away.
Goes back to what you were mentioning before. At the end of the day, being able to identify trends before they happen. For example, the example you just gave with the car. I mean, so interesting. Unmish, we have a few minutes left, and I just want to ask you a series of rapid fire questions, if I may, because I think there's also a lot of value that you can bring to those listening about leadership and career advice based on your experience.
Go for it, Jaime. I have not embarrassed myself in the last 40 minutes, but I'm sure I'll embarrass myself in the last 4.
There you will. One of the things that stood out to me when I was doing research is that, in your bio, you say that sport has taught you much more than your experience at INSEAD, Cambridge, London Business School. So I was wondering, would there be one lesson that you would be able to highlight that, sport has taught you?
Yeah, I mean, they're linked. I think you trust the process of what you're doing. You back yourself, and if you fall down, you dust yourself and get up.
Resilience.
Whether it's the process. Yeah, it's just, whether it's the process, whether it is trusting in the process, trusting in your team. But eventually, you'll lose more often than you'll win. That's life.
It is.
But sport teaches you that very early. And it teaches you saying, don't take it personally, dust yourself up, get up again.
I like that one.
So I think it's much more that which has helped me, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And okay, so during your whole career, you've been able to identify trends and, adopt new technologies and look at how these technologies can become profitable. Now, those are very important skills for any sports industry leader. So I was wondering if there were other leadership skills that you think that any sports industry leader of today needs to have.
I'll give you a skill and a piece of advice. I'll give you 2 things.
Great.
I think empathy is an important skill. Sport has been a very alpha atmosphere. Sports, trading floors, working in oil and gas, very alpha atmosphere, which is fine. I think there's a difference between aggression and being alpha. I think empathy is much required in a world where there's different types of inclusion, diversity, and equality, which is happening. So I think half the time, if you don't have the empathy, you won't even realize that, you've not been inclusive. So I think empathy is important. Everything else flows from that. I think that would be probably the biggest skill set I would request or expect, actually. In terms of advice, a lot of leaders have executive coaches, and some of them employ me as well. So I shouldn't bite the hand that feeds. And it's typically somebody who, the exec coach is somebody who's typically north of 40 age group. Yeah, a lot of 40, north of 50. I think they should have a teenage mentor as well, who is 15 or 14 and below. I think it's very, very, very humbling. We have a sample size of one in our house.
Yeah.
That's my basketball and cricket crazy daughter. And yeah, it's, they make their choices and they stick with them, or their friends made their choices for them, and you've lost them. I'll give you an example, Jaime. Today, she plays basketball, a sport she's played for 6 years. But she does not watch NBA TV, sitting in Singapore, which is 12 hours away from the US. She supports the Raptors, by the way. Another story. So the NBA does not know who she is.
Wow.
Because she's an analog data point on the basketball court.
Yeah.
She watches cricket. She follows the ICC app. Doesn't play the game. So she is a child who's giving, I would say, between 5 and 10 hours a week between watching, consuming, playing, discussing, debating, to two sports together.
Yeah.
And neither sport will identify her. If you don't identify them, how can you know what she likes or doesn't like?
Right.
So, get a 15-year-old to be your mentor. I think it definitely helps me.
Interesting. And you know what? It goes back to what we were discussing right at the beginning of the conversation. You need to bring digital natives into your life if you want to understand where the world is going. And the best way to do so is not to read or to watch, just to be in touch with them regularly, right? So I like that because it brings it all together. Unmish, this has been a fantastic conversation so far. I really enjoyed it, but I need to ask you one last question.
Go ahead.
Because I really need your take on this. As you know, at World Football Summit, we launched a rebrand. And part of this rebrand really calls out for an industry that is committed to excellence, that embraces innovation, also sustainability. And when we speak about sustainability, it's across its three pillars. So obviously it's the environmental, obviously it's the social, but also the economic, searching for that profitability. So if I were to ask if you could define in very, very quickly, 1-2 sentences, what would be the football industry you want, or the football industry you need? How would you do that?
So look, I very clearly have a thesis on sustainability in sport. I'm happy to share that with you. I see sustainability in sport in 3 buckets, and each of those are applicable to football. I think one is around materials, footwear, apparel, equipment. Right? And then you're looking at some fairly historical pieces, leather. The use of leather is there in so many balls, and shoes and all that kind of stuff, and biodegradable rayons. And so, materials, which is fundamentally equipment, apparel, footwear. That's one area, very, very big. Second is the real estate, stadiums, training facilities, grass, how much grass is used, all that kind of stuff. Very important piece to have. So real estate can be, anything from academies to training grounds to stadiums to gyms for the kids. And the third is events. What's your F&B? What's your procurement policy? How carbon neutral are your providers? I was in Sky. I used to work at the BBC, and we went across to Sky 15 years ago, and they were the first zero carbon television station in Europe in 2007, 8. And people used to look at them as, posturing, is that, the other. But, pioneers often get criticized. Columbus was criticized a lot. But yes, I would say 3 buckets. One is materials, equipment, apparel, footwear. Second is real estate, which is stadiums, training facilities, academies, gyms. And third is events, which is around, carbon offsets, or, promoting aviation fuel alternatives. Because you can't prevent planes from flying in. That's part of the story, right?
It's going to happen.
Hotels, which hotels are green, and therefore you do deals with those hotels. Which cities are more carbon neutral. Therefore, they need to be given preference for hosting cities. Eventually come down to checks, but hey, what the hell? So those are the 3 buckets I would look at. And that lens, I think, applies to football as well.
Well, thank you for that, because it does. And overall, thank you for this conversation, Riz. I really had a lot of fun. I think we're going to have to do a round 2 to see how everything evolves, and hopefully bring it back so you can teach us more about where the role of content, technology, and capital in football. Is there any? Yeah,
I was going to say, Jaime, it's been a pleasure. It's every conversation is only as good as the question being asked. And I still remember my tutor at Cambridge was always say to me, if you're able to ask a good question, if you're able to ask a question which elicits a good response, it means that you've actually been the beginning of a conversation, which always helps. So kudos to you as well.
Oh, I appreciate that. Appreciate that. I really do. But it's easy when you have guests that bring a lot of knowledge to the table. No, so Unmish, is there anywhere where people can follow you that you want to send them to, or they can learn more about what you do?
Look, for those of you who know me and those of you who come to know me, I live my life on LinkedIn. That's the only social media network that I am active on. I used to be on Twitter twice in the last decade, and I went off it. I'm trialing a couple of social media networks, which are right now in private beta because of the toxicity and the protection elements. But that's of course a private matter. But I think LinkedIn is the best place to get me. I usually spend too much time on it. I'm part of the Asia Creator Panel on LinkedIn. I spend, I would say, between 1 and 2 hours a day on LinkedIn doing different kinds of things for clients or for myself or for causes that I believe in. And I typically will come back to within 24 hours if you send me an email. Keep in mind, I'm now north of 30,000 followers, so I will not be able to connect. My apologies for that. But do follow me and do comment on my posts. We'll be able to build a relationship and hopefully, be able to contribute to the ecosystem.
Hopefully technology will help you get through all those replies.
Please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been great. We'll be in touch again soon, and then we'll see each other in Jeddah in a few days. Okay.
Jaime, muchas gracias. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in Jeddah, no doubt. And if there's a chance for a chapter 2, let's make it happen.
We'll make it happen. Thank you, Miss. Have a good day.
Excellent. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye.
And there you have Unmish with a masterclass on content, code, and capital. In fact, I really like this framework. I think it's something the industry really needs, as it implies sharing your story through content, embracing technology to solve problems, and being committed to profitability. Other takeaways from this conversation? Well, his definition of content was spot on. Story leads to engagement. It leads to trust and then to loyalty. And ultimately, loyalty will lead to revenue. But to develop effective content, you have to keep in mind these 3 questions. Who is the audience you're trying to reach? Why do they engage with your content? And more importantly, how can we get them to come back? Finally, remember, sports is a business. It has to create value, but also capture value, and do so in the base of generating trust by solving problems. Never forget that. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure I did. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the podcast on your platform of choice and share it with your industry colleagues. Oh, and before we go, if you're in Madrid, remember, you can visit La Hermosita. It's a place where, it's just a good place to have a sweet pastry, to break a day, to relax, to network. It's just great. And they have such amazing products, really. I bought my wife a piece of pie a few weeks back, and it was just amazing. Anyway, if you visit them, remember, La Hermosita, tell them you heard about us on the World Football Summit podcast. And remember, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can find the link in the show. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the World Football Summit podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something new. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you next time.